Hi there, it's me. I'm back. It's Roberta's Countdown to Retirement. It's Monday, December 15th, 10 days till Christmas. I hope you're all ready for Christmas and ready to just kind of kick back and get into the reason for the season. So, last week I told you part one of the story about my dad. So, as I said, December's a hard month for me, and it has to do with my dad and the end of his life. So I thought you needed to know about the beginning of his life. And now I want to talk about the middle of his life and a great love story. So I'm just going to start. Once upon a time, there was a young man named Bob Bettis. Once upon a time, there was a man named Bob Bettis. I was dropping a frame. I don't know why. I'm actually hardwired into the internet. So maybe there's an internet issue. I do not know. Anyway, he was born in the farm area outside of Culbertson, Nebraska. He was born in 1916. 8 years later, in Culbertson, Nebraska, to the French family was born a baby girl named Leota. She was 8 years younger than he was, and since they lived on the farm area, she probably wasn't aware of him for a while. But eventually, the Bettises had to move to town because they couldn't afford the rent for a farm. And all the boys then worked out at other people's farms out and around Culbertson, but the family moved as a whole to Culbertson. And my dad became best friends with Leota's brother Merle. So the Bettis kids and the French kids were all they were all people in the same age group, so they spent time together. They were in and out of each other's houses. My mom and dad used to tell me this story about when my mom was little, being sent to the Bettis house to get somebody to come home for supper, probably by Uncle Merle, who was my dad's best friend. Excuse me. Anyway, when she walked into the Bettis house, their dog bit her. My dad laughed and said that his dad said the only reason the dog bit her was because he didn't know what to do with a quiet child, because the Bettises were pretty loud and most of the Frenches were pretty loud. But my mom, Leota, was an introvert and really shy and didn't talk loud. So she didn't really fit in in this group of people. Anyway, I talked about my dad leaving Nebraska with his family in 1937. And obviously, the Bettises knew the Frenches pretty well by then because my mom's older sister, Irina, actually, I will show you. My mom's sister, Irina, was married to my dad's older brother, Jake, by the time they left for Nebraska. Left Nebraska for Oregon, and Irina already had her son, Claire. So he was about 3 years old when they left Nebraska in 37. So obviously the Frenches knew the Bettises, but my dad said when he left Nebraska, my mom was age, let's see, she was born in 24, they left in 30. She was 13. She was all big eyes and skinny legs and nubby knees. That's what he knew about her. So, my dad came to Oregon, joined the war, like I talked about last week, and my mom finished growing up in Nebraska. When she graduated from high school in, I think, 1941, she went to California to stay with her sister, Ruby. Ruby invited her to come out there because Ruby and her husband were both working and they needed someone to take care of their three children, Tuff and Royce and Charlene. And my mom loved kids from the time she was young. She loved kids and taking care of kids. That's what her job had been every summer back in Culbertson, was taking care of people's children. So she went to California. It wasn't going very well for her there. She loved the kids, not crazy about the Los Angeles area, way too big for my mom. She preferred small town life, being shy and an introvert. Culbertson, Nebraska, where everybody knew her, was a great place. LA, where it was hard to make friends, and all she saw were her sister and brother-in-law, wasn't really working for her. So when the war started, my Uncle Jake wanted to join up, but he didn't really have to because he was married and he had 3 children by the time the war started. My cousin Elsie, his third child, was born in 1941, just as the war was starting. But Jake really wanted to go. But both Jake and Irina worked. So um, Aunt Irina was kind of the caretaker of all her siblings, making sure everybody was okay. And I think my mom had been writing to her and telling her that LA wasn't working out so well for her. So my Aunt Irina offered if she wanted to come to Tillamook and stay, she could take care of Irina's 3 kids, Claire, Gerald, and Elsie. And Irina could work. And when Irina wasn't working, mom could get a job. So my mom decided to do that, and she came to Tillamook to live. Jake and Irina lived out south of Tillamook, out by where there, by the time my mom came, was a Naval Air Station, a blimp base at South. So my aunt worked for the Eastwoods at the South Prairie store, and my mom lived with my Aunt Irina, and later got a part-time job working as a cook's assistant at the hospital. So this is what my mom looked like when she came to Oregon. This is my mom and her brother Keith, and all 6 of those kids that she had been taking care of. This is Charlene and Elsie and Royce. And this is Royce, this is Tough. This is Gerald, and this is Claire. And this is my Uncle Keith. That's what my mom looked like when in 1942, I'm thinking, when she got here. It sounds about right that she came out here in 1942. Loved taking care of the kids. But obviously, more than big eyes and knobby knees at this point. So my dad came home on leave in 1943. Remember last week I told you about the New Orleans coming back to Puget Sound to get repairs, and the sailors got leave. Well, since my dad was so close to Oregon, he spent his leave in Tillamook. And here was my mom. And suddenly he noticed this pretty girl with big eyes, and she was quiet and calm. And I think after the intense war experience that he had been having, as I told you about all the battles he'd been in from March until November of 42, he'd been pretty constantly under siege. And I think he was looking for something different than what he had been used to before. He was liked parties and dancing and drinking before, but he was looking for something a little calmer and a little quieter when he came home. And I think she fit the bill. So he asked her out on a date. First date, going to the Tillamook Coliseum to see Gone with the Wind. It had come out in 1939, but it was one of the movies playing. My dad said it was a great reason, 3 hours in a theater with a pretty girl in the dark, hold hands. It was a great first date, he said. Chivalry. So mom was taking care of the kids. Elsie had been born after my dad left for the war, or she was so small when he left that she didn't remember him. So he comes home in 42, and she's 2 years old. She doesn't know this guy in a sailor suit, but she knows her Aunt Leota really, really well. So she had bruised her feet walking on rocks, and my mom was lugging Elsie around, and my dad offered to carry Elsie for my mom. And Elsie just, I want Leota, I want Yoda, I want Yoda. And she didn't know Uncle Bob. It must have broken his heart because in later years, the two of them were really close. Elsie and her Uncle Bob were really close. But my dad was trying to be chivalrous and carry her for my mom. So they struck some kind of short relationship in that 30 days he was home. And then the rest of their courtship was by letter. They were writing the whole time that he went back to the Pacific. I wish I could share what they wrote, because I think that's how they really fell in love, was by the letters they wrote. And I'd seen them shortly after my dad died. I saw them in my mom's trunk. But when I went to look for them after my mom's death in 2007, I couldn't find them. They were gone. I suspect my mom, being the private person that she was, thought that it was nobody's business but hers and his, that what they said and what they felt in those early days of their relationship. But they fell in love. And as my understanding, he even proposed in a letter, and she said yes in a letter. So when the war was over in 45, he was still out in the Pacific for a while, but then his boat came to back to the mainland. And he was stationed in San Diego, and they set a wedding date by letter. And Mom got ready to get married in June of 1946. They got married. This is my mom and dad on their wedding day. She was 22 years old. She weighed 89 pounds. And I've never seen her in my entire life with a silly face like that ever. But on that day, she must have been deliriously happy, because it wasn't like her to be silly. And that's how I know she was happy. So there they are, June 1946, with their wedding cake. They got married in my grandparents' house down in Cloverdale. And the wedding party was all of their relatives. It's my mom and her parents are back there, and all of my dad's brothers were there. The ones that were married came with their wives. We've got kids. It's just, that was the wedding party. Their wedding trip, my mom's wedding trip was a bus trip to San Diego, California, sitting on my dad's lap all the way, because the bus was full of Army and Navy and going back to bases in California. So off they went to San Diego, another big area. And I think it must have been hard. They found a room in a house with some nice people who my mom took to really well and became kind of like family too, because it sounds like to me my dad spent the week at the Navy base and was with my mom on the weekends. So she liked it there. She talked about the people that they lived with, that she roomed with a lot, as really good people who were really kind to her and took her in as another daughter, and she sent Christmas cards the rest of their lives to them. So she did well there, better than she did when she lived in Los Angeles. But still, it wasn't ideal rooming in someone else's house. Now, my dad had re-enlisted just before the war ended, because they were encouraging people to re-enlist because they didn't know when the war was going to end. But after the war ended and they came back to the mainland, the U.S. Navy, and I think probably other military, decided they had way too many people. So they offered them an early out with a bonus for an early out. And so my dad decided to take that, got their lump sum payment, and they came back to Tillamook County and decided that my dad didn't want to be a dairy farmer anymore. So they used their lump sum money. My dad bought a suit, a really nice expensive suit for 1946, 47. And then the rest of it they used to buy a travel trailer that they were going to live in, because they bought on time from some nice people in Garibaldi, most of a block on the hill in Garibaldi, which is actually where I live, and the house that they built. So they were going to live in the trailer and build as they had the money, so that the land and the house was free and clear. My dad got a job at one of, I think there were 3 lumber mills. He got a job at a lumber mill in Garibaldi, and that's where they worked. I expect that's how they got the money and the lumber to build the house. And so they built a house. Later, when they got the house built, my grandpa Bettis moved into the trailer and lived in their backyard. So my dad worked in the mill till I think 1950, about 3 years, and decided that's a pretty dangerous job, and he wanted to do something else. So he decided that he wanted to be an auto and body fender and repair and paint car painting. So he used the GI Bill and went to Oregon Technical Institute, OTI, in Klamath Falls for 2 years. The campus was full of veterans and their wives and kids, all getting trained to do jobs using the GI Bill so that they could become part of the economy that happened post-war. So they were all housed in family housing, and and what my dad said were really old barracks that had been put in place there, and they built family there too. And so in 1952, my dad finished his program there, and they went to Astoria, where he got his first job, where I think he interned or apprenticed as part of the program, was doing apprentice for a couple of years. So he worked there for a while, and while they were doing that, they rented out their house in Garibaldi. So they were making some money there, and they were living in an apartment in Astoria and coming home quite frequently to see their family down in Tillamook County. But they still wanted to come back to Tillamook. So my dad got a job at Tillamook Ford Company, Tillamook, working, repairing cars and painting cars. In later years, they'd tell me he was a craftsman. He was an artist when it came to repairing a car and painting it. He even would, when I was little, once he helped people restore cars. He'd do the painting. One of the people in Garibaldi owned a 1930s big car that would remind you of the movie Bonnie and Clyde. And my dad fixed every dent meticulously and then painted it like metal black, shiny lacquery. It was gorgeous. My dad was so proud of that. But anyway, came back to Garibaldi to live in the house that they'd built and started their life. He was working. They wanted to have kids, and they were trying to have kids. That wasn't doing so well for them. It just wasn't happening. So my mom got a job working at the Garibaldi grade school as an assistant cook, because she'd done that at the hospital in Tillamook during the war a little bit. So they went to work. And so the two of them worked and built their life in Garibaldi. My mom found a church in the Garibaldi Methodist Church, and they just built their life. They were married for 14 years before I came along. In fact, they'd been told that they weren't going to be able to have children, that what past fertility experts in the 1950s told my parents it was a 1 in a million chance that they'd get pregnant. So they spent lots of time taking care of, my mom had lots of nieces and nephews, and my dad had lots of nieces and nephews, and they loved to bring kids to their house to stay for weeks at a time, and they would babysit those kids. My parents just loved being around their siblings' kids, and everybody loved Aunt Leota and Uncle Bob. So in the fall of 1959, my mom started to feel unwell, and they went to different doctors, and no one could figure out why she didn't feel well. And my dad finally decided nobody was giving him any good information. And they went to a Dr. White, a female doctor, which was for 1959 was pretty unheard of, at the Reinhardt Clinic. The Reinhardt Clinic is in Wheeler, or was in Wheeler at the time, and the Reinhardt family established it. And Dr. White had married Dr. Reinhardt, the son of the original Dr. Reinhardt. And so she's one of, I think, maybe the only female doctor in the county. Who knows how many female doctors there actually were in the state? Not very many, I'm guessing. Anyway, Dr. White asked her if she could be pregnant. My mom's going, no, everyone tells me it's impossible. But Dr. White, being an optimist, said, well, those were men doctors. What do men know? Let's do the test. And sure enough, they were expecting. It was when I was born in June of 1960, my grandfather Bettis, who was dying of cancer, said it was the longest 9 months of his life. But they had their family. The three of us, we were a family. And like they loved me. I knew from the moment I could think about it, I knew that I was well loved. My dad told me once, I was a gift. And so he treasured that gift. I think when you look at pictures of us, you can tell that my dad, he was the center of our universe, both my mom and I. My dad was the center of our universe. As I grew, I watched them together. And sometimes I felt outside the circle of what they felt for each other. And I didn't understand it till I was much older. But, my dad used to come home from work. My mom wouldn't so my mom would maybe start peeling the potatoes for our dinner just as she heard my dad drive in, because he always stopped for his one drink at a little bar downtown, and she didn't want to have dinner ready before it was time. So she'd start peeling potatoes and cutting them up. My dad would come in and he'd put his lunchbox down and he'd step up behind my mom and just hold her really close. She'd lean back into him and they'd just stand that way. And I felt so outside that circle because they didn't say anything. They were just in that moment feeling close to one another. And I felt outside that circle. I knew they loved me, but I still felt outside that circle because it was a moment that didn't need interruption. And then my dad would grab a piece of peeled cut potato and stick it in his mouth and give her another quick hug and walk back to the living room to watch the evening news. But there were intimate little moments like that when I was little, I didn't understand just what those meant to them. But they were the quiet moments when they just were close to one another. And there was no room for me in those moments. Now I knew I was loved, and it was two different ways. My father was the extrovert. I think every introvert needs to marry an extrovert. My father was the introvert, the one who gave praise and hugs and was always the one going, "That's my kid," at the Christmas concerts, or telling me how proud he was when I brought home a paper with an A, or when he went to the school and for my spelling bees and I won. He was the person always telling me how wonderful I was. My mom's love language was taking care, sewing all my clothes, because um, I was built a little differently. It was hard to find clothes that fit. So my mom would sew all my clothes. She cooked, she cleaned. She was also the mom that I knew whenever they asked for a volunteer to go on a field trip or anything else they needed at school, I knew if I raised my hand and waved it really hard and said, "My mom will do it, my mom will do it," my mom would do it. She was there for all those things. She was a room mother, thousands of birthday cakes and cookies, and for classrooms through the years, until I didn't want my mom at school anymore. But that was my mom's love language. Another example of that is when the year I graduated from high school, um, I I belonged to a organization called Theta Rho Girls. It was the youth group that was associated with Oddfellows and Rebecca's. And I applied for a scholarship. I applied for another scholarship for an organization my mom belonged to called Women's Relief Corps. And I'd gotten a letter that I had gotten that scholarship, but that I was going to have to come to their state convention and read my essay. And my dad was really proud. He was telling everybody, "She's got to go read her essay. I told you, she's a really great writer." And what I didn't know is I didn't get the Theta Rho scholarship, and I didn't get any notice. But when I went to that convention, which was the same week as the Women's Relief Corps convention, I won Theta Rho Girl of the Year. And when I called my dad, he wasn't feeling well. He really wasn't feeling well, but he was still so happy. And whoever was staying with him, because my mom was with me, whoever who was staying with him, you could just hear him telling them, "I told you my girl was the good girl." He was just always that way. My mom didn't say much about that, and I could never tell. My mom hardly ever said, "I'm proud of you," or "good job." Those were things my dad did. But we went to Eugene to the Women's Relief Corps convention, and we went to the banquet where I was going to read my scholarship. And I'm sitting next to the lady who I discovered was the scholarship chairperson. And she's talking to me, and she's telling me, "Oh, your mother talks about you all the time and how proud she is." And when she says, "When I read this essay, I knew why your mom was so proud." And I was like, "My mom talks about me?" Because she never says those things to me. When we went back to the motel that night, I said, "How come they all tell me that you talk about me and tell them how proud you are of me, but you don't tell me?" And my mom said, "I don't want you to get a big head. Your dad does enough of that." She says, "It's enough to know that you've done well." So two different ways of showing love, but each in their own way, loving, wonderful parents. And we built a wonderful life together. I talk about struggles. We all have them as teenagers with our parents, but it was a good life. And then in the fall of 1977, my dad started to get ill. He never missed work, but all of a sudden he was usually missing maybe 2 weeks of work every month. And we kept going to the doctor in Wheeler, and they kept treating different things. First, they thought his ulcer might be reappearing because he was having stomach issues, and he'd had an ulcer in the 60s. So they treated the ulcer, and then they thought it might be his heart, and then they thought it might be, he was just sick. You knew he was sick when he didn't go hunting that fall. So he just got sicker and sicker, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. Now, as I told you, he was always proud of me, and so you knew my dad was really sick when he couldn't feel well enough to come to my high school graduation. That was a moment he wouldn't have missed for anything, but he was so sick. He was so sick. I had other people there. My mom went to graduation, my Uncle Jake, my cousin Kenny. They were all there, and they were all smiles and rooting for me. But my dad, who'd been my cheerleader, wasn't there. It was really hard. Shortly after we got back from that Girl of the Year and scholarship meeting, it's like a week later maybe, the doctor finally admitted that my dad needed to see someone else. So they sent him to St. Vincent's, and they did a bunch of tests. They did something, and they discovered a tumor. And the one they found was on his adrenal gland. And when they did the biopsy, they said that wasn't the host area. That wasn't the host tumor. But they found a tumor, a really big one, on the outside of his lungs, right where your sternum, where your ribs and everything come together. And it was going to be inoperable. There was no way you could get to that spot, they said. And they decided that radiation was the only option. And they said that the prognosis was not great, 6 months to 24 months. My dad swore he was going to beat it. He was going to fight it with everything he had. And he didn't want anything in our lives to change. He wanted me to go to college in the fall. I was planning to go to Chemeketa Community College and have my own apartment. He wouldn't let me stop those plans. I had a job lined up that summer. He wouldn't let me stay home with him because, quite frankly, he wasn't there a lot. When they discovered the tumor and how everything was going to be needed, he transferred his care to the Veterans Administration, and he was in the VA hospital most of the summer and my mom was out there in Portland, staying at my Uncle Dell's house with him most of that summer. So I didn't see my parents much. Occasionally on weekends, he'd get out and he'd come home, and he'd be home for a week or so, and then he'd have to go back. But radiation was really taking it out of him, and it was awful. It was truly awful for all of us. Radiation is just, in 1978, was just a horrible treatment. He was like a skeleton covered by skin. And this is when I finally figured out just what it meant to be in love and to love someone the way grown-ups fall in love. The treatment was awful, and he was home. It was a weekend. It was a weekend in the summer. It was before I went to Salem to college, and he was feeling really awful and really fractious and couldn't get comfortable on the sofa. And my mom was cleaning up the dinner dishes and putting things away. And he was laying on the sofa in the living room. And when she was finished, she came to sit in the chair beside him. And he put out his hand, and she put her hand in his, and he held it really tightly, but his whole body relaxed. And all of a sudden, he could get comfortable. And they were just silent in that moment. It was just the two of them there. And that's the moment at age 18 where I really understood my parents didn't just love each other. They were in love, and they were having these intimate moments that were just between the two of them. It didn't mean they loved me less. It just meant that in that moment, they needed each other. So, like I said, Dad wouldn't let us stop doing anything. He wanted our lives to go on just the way we were doing. So my mom kept up with Women's Relief Corps and all the activities of that. And I went to college in September. I came home every weekend. I think my mom, who was with my dad more by then, the radiation treatment was over, but he wasn't recovering. But my mom, I don't think it was so gradual for her. I wasn't seeing him all the time. So when I came home every couple of weeks, I could see it wasn't getting better. But my mom was still hanging on to the hope that he was gonna make it. I knew, although I never said it. I think Mom and I were both in denial. We were just couldn't believe we were going to lose him. So I came home for Thanksgiving, and it was our last Thanksgiving, only I didn't know that. I think he did. My mom had to go work at a craft bazaar on the Friday and Saturday after Thanksgiving, and so it was just me and my dad. And he started this long conversation about what it meant to him to be my father. Excuse me. And how proud he was of me. And all his hopes and dreams. But then, the next minute, he turned around and was his old jokey self, because we had this serious conversation about life and growing up and what it meant to be an adult. And then we turned on a John Wayne movie and watched a John Wayne movie together, his favorite thing to do. So my mom for Thanksgiving would always she made all her favorite pies. I liked lemon meringue. My dad liked pumpkin or mincemeat. So we were down to the last piece of lemon meringue pie I went to get it. And as I'm taking the fork with my last bite of pie, my dad looks at me and says, "Gee, what I wouldn't give for a piece of lemon meringue pie." And I stopped the guilt in my face, and it made him laugh so hard, because that's what he would do sometimes. It's just in that moment. So I wanted to give me a laugh. And then he said, "I'm just kidding." And we laughed. Later, I said if I'd known that was going to be the last conversation I had with him, there were things I would have said. But I didn't, because I thought I'd see him again. So I went back to school and had like 2 weeks more till finals. And I came home from finals. We had decided that we were going to have this really big Christmas at our house. I think by then we'd all acknowledged this was going to be our last Christmas. So my mom called every cousin, every aunt and uncle. Everyone was coming to our house for Christmas. And so when I got home, it was maybe about the 10th or so, maybe the 14th. The house was decorated. The Christmas tree was up. All the presents she and I had gotten for Dad and she'd gotten for me, everything was under the tree. We were ready for Christmas. But when I walked in the living room that night from coming home from Salem to spend the rest of December, my dad wasn't there. And I asked her where he was, and she told me that he was at the VA hospital, that he'd had a bad early part of the week, and the ambulance had to take him to back to the VA. But that he was doing much better, that she'd talk to him on the phone every day, and she actually thought that he was coming home soon. And I was okay with that. She said, I asked if we could go see him, and she said, oh, we don't need to. He's going to be home in a couple days. So, okay. So we went ahead preparing for Christmas. And then December 18th came. And I was sleeping on the couch because my room didn't have a heater in it and it was cold. So I was sleeping on the sofa and my mom was sleeping in her room, and the phone rang at 5 in the morning. Now, when somebody you know is terminally ill and the phone rings at 5 o'clock, you kind of know it's not going to be good news. And I was already crying when my mom answered the phone. But she answered the phone, and the VA hospital told her he was gone. And that something that they hadn't expected had happened, and he was gone. He was supposed to be coming home that day, and he was gone. 7 days before Christmas. So my mom and I fell apart for my mom less time than I. I remember sitting on the sofa and her rocking me like she used to when I was little, just trying to comfort her wailing child because I was hysterically weeping. And then we got on with the phone calls that needed to be made. My Uncle Merle, who was my dad's best friend, lived in Coos Bay, and he was her first phone call. And it was really odd that, that was probably at 6 a.m. By 2 p.m., he was there to take care of his little sister and me. And he's the one that took us to make the funeral arrangements. And we had to pick a date. And there were lots of people coming for Christmas anyway, some of them flying from across the country. So my mom decided that we were going to wait for the funeral so that all those people who already had travel arrangements could make it to the funeral. So my dad's funeral was on December 23rd. I don't remember much about that week from the 18th to the 23rd. Just don't. What I do remember is after the funeral, we had everybody at our house for food and drinks and stories. And my mom started dispensing with the gifts that we'd gotten from my dad. I know that seems strange, but this woman from the Depression said there was no sense in those things going to waste that we'd spent money on. And I had bought my dad a pair of slippers, and he was the same foot size as my Uncle Keith. And I remember my Uncle Keith coming to me and asking me if I was okay with that. And I looked at my mom and I knew what she expected me to say, so I said yes, because what good's a pair of slippers with no one to wear them? So they all decided that Christmas wasn't going to be at our house. It was too much to expect. So my Uncle Leonard lived in Portland, and he invited everyone there to come to his house for Christmas. And so on the morning of the 24th, we drove to Portland with my Uncle Keith and Aunt Betty, and that's where we were going to stay. It was a horrendous day. My mom telling me the rest of our family celebrates and gives gifts on the 24th. my family always did it on the 25th. So there was going to be this huge thing at Uncle Leonard's on the 24th. My mom kept telling me to put on a happy face, to not ruin Christmas for the rest of the family because I was sad. And you might think that's cruel, but that's, she was worrying about the rest of them. I just wanted to avoid a Christmas, and I'm not going to lie. I wanted to avoid Christmas for a very long time after that. I became a real Scrooge. Christmas was a time to survive through, not enjoy. And I totally forgot what Christmas was supposed to be about, because for the longest time, Christmas was about losing my dad. And Christmas was about what I didn't have, not what I had. So this is a kind of sad place to end this story, but it does have a happier ending for me. But I'm not going to share that today. I'm going to share next week with you how that all changed for me and why Christmas is different now. But I needed you to know why this next week is so hard for me, and why I stay so busy and try to keep myself from thinking about what I've lost. But in doing this, I hope in telling these stories, I hope somebody can see that when someone is ill, I want to reach out, and I want to tell them that it's sad and it's hard. And one of the things everyone should remember, when one person gets a major illness, the whole family is part of that. Cancer doesn't just strike the person that has the cancer. It affects the wives, the spouses, and the children, and everyone. It's not one person is ill, it's the whole family. And the whole family needs help and support. And anyway, my dad was a wonderful man. He didn't just love me and my mom or my cousins or my aunts and uncles. He took care of all kinds of people. After his funeral, there were people talking about him and the things he did that made a difference in their lives. And I learned things about him that I didn't know. That one of the young men that he worked with at Tillamook Ford said he'd been a real mentor, and this young man hadn't really had anybody that had expectations of him in his life. He told this story about he rode this bike to work one day that he'd actually stolen off of someone's porch. And when my dad asked him where he got the bike, he told him. My dad said, well, you have to take that back. You stole it. It's not. My dad said, well, how would you feel if you saved all your money for a great bike and then somebody just took it? And he told me the next day he did take it back, and he knocked on the door of the people who took it from and apologized. And he didn't go to jail. They thanked him for it. And he said he felt better about himself because my dad let him know there were expectations of being a young man and what it meant to be, and that my dad was proud of him for doing what was the right thing, because that was my dad. You do the right thing, whether it's comfortable or not, you do the right thing. My dad's bosses told me about what a great man he was to have to work for. They knew they could always count on him, and he'd always be there, because that's who he was. If you said you were going to do something, you do it. And that's how I try to live my life, because that's how he lived his life. That's how they lived their life together as a couple. They were there for everyone who needed them. And I try. And I hope they'd be proud. But anyway, I digress. I hope that you're all having time with I hope there's some quiet time in this next 10 days for you to sit down with your family and appreciate the gift of family, the gift of love, because that's the true gift of Christmas. So anyway, I will see you all next week.